Welcome back to the Quinexus podcast. Today we are talking about protecting online identity. I'm Chuck.
I'm Jack, and welcome.
And so, what does protecting online identity mean? What are the key factors to protecting our online identity?
There's really three key functions when it comes to accessing resources on a network, online or at a business network. And first, identity. Identity is nothing more than a user ID. It's assigned to you by your company, or when you sign up for Amazon, you have to give yourself a username. That is your identity, that username. The next thing is authorization. Authorization, from a networking standpoint, means what are you allowed to do with the resources that are available on the system. Example, you're not allowed, if you're in engineering, you're not allowed to see what HR is doing in the company. You're authorized to do your engineering work. HR is authorized to do their work. If you're an Amazon consumer and you're shopping on Amazon, you're allowed to look at what's for sale. You're allowed to put things in the cart. You're allowed to check out. You're not allowed to change prices on those items that you might be interested in. That is the concept of authorized, what you're allowed to do. The third main concept, and we're going to primarily be talking today, is about authentication. Authentication means you have to prove you are who you say you are. You log in with an ID and you're given a password. And there are things that go beyond passwords, which again is the topic of today's podcast, is authentication. Being able to prove who you are and the industry in a non-repeatable way, which means that someone cannot come back and say, well, that really wasn't me, because of the processes in place through non-repudiation. It actually proves that you are who you say you are.
Okay. So we're going to talk about passwords, and passwords are a bane of sort of our daily lives now. And we have these, books where we're writing things down and you're not really supposed to do that. Or you can have a password manager, but then does it link to your phone? So passwords are a real issue. And first, how do passwords get cracked or get hacked or get learned by the criminal?
There's three ways criminals can find your password. One we talk about in every podcast, we just can't get over this topic, is social engineering. Social engineering is getting someone to do something they would not normally do. If I ask you, Chuck, what's your password for your Fifth Third account? Not that I even know you have a Fifth Third account, it may be another bank. You would not give it to me. If I sent you an email that looked like it was Fifth Third, you might be tempted to click on it and see what's going on. Now more than ever, with the pandemic and the coronavirus and government stimulus programs, people are getting checks and emails, and people are also getting notifications that their stimulus check is on the way. This is big, and people are clicking on these links, and people are logging into sites, and these aren't real sites, so it's very important. So one way passwords are cracked is we're giving it to them. We shouldn't be doing that, and we need to keep our guard up.
Well, and just to add to that, a lot of people are working from home. A lot of new hires are starting a job working from home, and criminals are figuring this out and social engineering against the job market and against people getting hired. So all these aspects of public life going more remotely is just lending to social engineering.
And I've talked about password reuse. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but it's a good time to remind everyone about the concept of password reuse. You should not use a password that you used for personal things, such as your online banking at work. Once they get your password, most of the criminals know that we are typically lazy and we use the same password on many sites. So once they have one site's password, they're going to be looking to exploit many other sites you may have that they're going to guess you're using the same password. The next common way that passwords are found on accounts, especially online accounts, is brute force attacks. A brute force attack is when someone tries, and there's automated tools out there, so when I say someone tries, they're running an automated tool against your online account, and it's just guessing common passwords over and over again. And what's very important on tools, especially if you're using Google Apps, if you're using Microsoft online services, the Office 365 platform, is to set it up. Let's back up. You need to check and make sure that the defaults are acceptable. If not, you need to change the defaults and enable account lockouts. After so many failed attempts, the account gets locked for a period of time or has to be reset by an administrator. That is the most effective way to prevent brute force attacks, these automated attacks, from finding passwords. Brute force attacks are very effective. And again, there's easy security controls that can be implemented. And if they're not implemented, bad things can happen. The next way that passwords can be cracked, and this is going to be more of an aggressive attacker that's coming after a specific organization, is if they can actually harvest the password database. Every system out there has a password database that has all the user IDs and passwords. So when you authenticate yourself to the system, it knows that it's you. If that database can be harvested from the system, that database can now be run through a password cracker tool. And password cracker tools are very efficient, especially with the speed of computing becoming so fast these days and inexpensive, that small passwords, 5-character passwords, even 8-character passwords, can be cracked in seconds. So when we're concerned about this, we're concerned about password length also. Typically, password length should be 13 plus characters. There's recommendations that are coming out that they should be 25-character passwords. 25 is kind of an incredible size password. And I use the term password, but let's talk about passphrases. Passphrases are phrases that are easier for you to remember. When we talk about dictionary attacks and password crackers, you shouldn't be using a password that's long, 25 characters, that's a passage from the Bible, a password in a movie. Even in a different language, there's crackers that have the most common hashes, is what they're called, in multiple languages, and it runs very, very quick. So long passwords are great when it comes to a brute force attack. Long passages aren't so great when it comes to a dictionary attack with common expressions. An important distinction there.
Okay, good. Another point that came to mind for me was known hacked passwords. So I've gotten emails from my bank or from different services that say, this password that's associated with your email is known on the dark web. Stop using it. So, right. And usually it's a 10-year-old password or something, but so that is to say, don't continue to use the same passwords year over year over year, because these things get discovered. You know, we have to sign up for anything you want to do now. You have to sign up and make a username and password for a free service, right? And so as you use those passwords, discard them over time, right?
To some extent. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, recently put out new guidance. Previously, and when I say recently, within 2 years, prior to that, organizations, and many organizations still do, but it was required, and NIST provided guidance for changing your password on a regular basis. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, annually, whatever, you should change your password. The guidance that they put out is if there's no real threat that your password or account has been compromised, there's no need to change your password. There's some other requirements that go back that you should also be running a dictionary attack against your internal database to make sure that the passwords that are being used are not known in these dictionaries and can easily be compromised. So changing the password for changing password's sake is no longer a requirement unless you believe there's a reason that it has been compromised.
Okay, good.
You mentioned getting emails from your bank saying this password has been found on the dark web, you should change it. The criminals are actually using passwords that have been found on the dark web and sending emails and threatening that we've got access to your system. Here's the password to your system. And people are freaking out because of that. Chances are the password you're getting is an old password. Hopefully you're not using that old password anymore because you've been notified Yahoo had a 3 billion passwords cracked. They're out there, and criminals are buying these lists and trying to extort individuals by threatening that we have your password. If you get a notification that your password's been breached, that means, or that you're not your password, but an organization you work with has been breached, and that password is out there, and they lost the password database, you're going to get a notification. You need to change your password. Otherwise, you're going to get one of these emails, and it's actually going to be the password you're still using. So that's when you want to change a password, when you know there's a possibility that that password is out there in the wild.
Okay, good.
Good question.
So you want to go into
Yes.
sort of more secure. So we have multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication. What do these things mean?
Multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication are the same. And what it means is you have 2 out of 3 things. It's something you know, which is a password, something you are, which is biometrics, or something you have, which might be your cell phone or a little key fob with a number that changes occasionally. So having 2 out of those 3 items consists of multi-factor or two-factor authentication. The huge benefit of multi-factor authentication is you gave your password to a criminal through a spear phishing campaign, or someone does harvest a database and they've got your password. What can they do with that? They can try to log into your system, but without having your phone or the biometrics, your retina scan, thumbprint, something that you are, that password is useless without the second factor. So two-factor, multi-factor authentication is one of the best ways to prevent someone from getting into your account.
And this is another place where these might be available to you, but not turned on by default.
Correct.
So if this is a choice, if this is an option, you should be using these tools.
Correct. Microsoft supports two-factor authentication for their Office 365 online platform. They have something called the Microsoft Authenticator. Google has their Google Authenticator and supports two-factor authentication. And there's also SMS authentication. SMS is when you get a text message. Your bank may offer text message authentication. Let's talk about the difference. An authenticator, such as Microsoft or Google, requires you to download an app that's on your device. And that app can be on other devices, not just your phone. So you have multiple ways to authenticate yourself. A concern about SMS, which sends a text to your phone, is if you don't have your phone or lose your phone, you can't get into your account. You don't need your phone to use one of the authenticator technologies. Additionally, SMS in 2016, NIST started recommending SMS not be used. The reason being is you can take your phone and socially engineer somebody that works for the telephone company, one of those carriers, to reprogram your phone with someone else's information. Again, this is going to take a dedicated hacker. For the most part, I believe SMS is secure depending on what industry you work in. You need to be concerned about that. But from an attack against a single individual that might work for a company and have SMS for their company information, the threat's very, very low. Again, you need to realize what industry you work in, be cognizant of that, and take appropriate actions. The authenticator is actually a shared key encryption technology where it doesn't matter what phone you have or what device it's on. It's actually the application that is doing the sharing of the information to get you the authentication code. So it's much more secure than using a typical SMS text message.
Yeah, and they time out after like 30 seconds. So it's producing a new code every 30 or 60 seconds.
If you don't respond within so many seconds, you're going to have to go through the authentication process again, and then prove that you are who you are, that you have the device.
So what do you suggest to manage all of these passwords that we have to keep track of nowadays?
Password management has become a huge challenge for many organizations, almost every organization, and for the individual. I don't know how many passwords I have, but it's a lot. There are tools out there. They're called password managers. There's two that I can speak of directly off the top of my head. One is LastPass. The other one is KeePass. KeePass is KeePass. What they allow you to do is create a secure file where you can manage your passwords either personally, again, or from a business perspective. From a business perspective, what you're concerned about is your users that have access to online accounts, such as possibly banking accounts, order entry systems, vendor information. And if you have an enterprise password manager, when the company actually takes responsibility for managing it, backing up, and making sure it's there. And if somebody should leave the organization, the company will have access to all those passwords at that time.
That's a good point.
There is a security issue with that, and it needs to be, like all things, it needs to be managed properly internally to keep it safe. So an enterprise management solution is great for businesses for many reasons. And from a personal perspective, having a KeePass or password manager like KeePass is also a tremendous useful tool to prevent you from writing them down and keeping it in a notebook. Years ago, actually within the last 5 years, up to 5 years ago, we actually recommended organizations that had certain individuals that had access to certain things to keep a notebook with passwords, write the passwords in the notebook gets locked up in a vault, and if something should happen to that person from a business continuity perspective, the organization had access to that person's online accounts. Additionally, if you're still doing that, you need to have a process that on a quarterly basis that gets updated because passwords do get reset. It needs to be checked and maintained if you are still using a notebook type method. And again, it needs to be kept in a secure fashion. So password managers or the notebooks are with enterprise password managers, not as big a need as they used to be.
To wrap up the concepts that we've gone through today, we have three concepts that we talked about: identity, authorization, and authentication. Identity being the user ID, authorization being what you're allowed to see when you log into that system, and authentication being the password. We talked a lot about passwords not being enough anymore and having this other step, which is our multifactor or our two-factor, which could be SMS or using something like Google Authenticator. We talked about default settings and how a lot of issues we're seeing are because these tools are available, but they're not being turned on by a lot of companies. And then we talked about password managers and what you recommend there.
Great. I really want to emphasize the default settings. The biggest one to enable is account lockout. Sometimes the account lockout is on by default, but you need to make sure that it is enabled. And even if it is on by default, someone may have turned it off. And again, to protect yourself, because your identity is now available and all these resources are available with your identity online, brute force attacks are becoming extremely common. So making sure you enable or the account lockout is enabled is absolutely critical these days.
Great.
Okay. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions, again, my name's Jack. I'm the CEO of Quinexus. I'd love to have a chat with you to see if we could be of help, or if you need any clarity on some of the topics we've covered here, please feel free to reach out.
And we hope you are enjoying the new podcast format. Like, comment, and subscribe on any of the platforms that you're seeing this on. And also, please reach out for future topics. We would love to hear what you would like to hear about.
Until next time.